7.6 factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. If you recall in 7.5, we factored, right? We were refactoring, but we had where there was no a. Therefore, where a equaled 1. That was in 7.5. Now in 7.6, we're going to where a does not equal 1. It could be a negative or a number greater than 1. The first thing I want you guys to look at is if you have a GCF. Okay, that's the first thing you're going to look if you have a GCF to factor out the polynomials, and then you could factor off furthermore. Okay, 2, you could, after that, you could factor further. Okay, but first, always look if there's a GCF, a common factor with all the terms, the numbers in each of the terms factor out. Let's look at some examples. Factoring out the GCF. So if you recall, remember the first thing you want to do, you want to make sure that if you have a GCF. So let me rewrite the equation. 5x squared plus 15x plus 10. So if we look at each number in each of these terms, 5, 15, and 10, I'm going to see if I have a greatest common factor amongst them. And I know it's going to be 5. So if I factor out 5, I'm going to be left inside x squared. 5 times what gives me 15x? 3. So plus 3x plus 2, because 5 times 2 gives me 10. Now I'm left with 5 times a trinomial, correct? I could continue to factor out these right here, the trinomial, correct? Just how we did in 7.5. So I know that C is what? Positive, and B is also positive. That means that both binomials are going to be positive. So it's going to, answer is going to be 2. Factors of 2 going to be 2 and 1. And then when added together gives me 3, correct? So my final answer is going to be 5 times x plus 2 times x plus 1. So the only difference, as you can see now, is that we have a factor, a number outside, which is 5. But your final answer is 5 times the two binomials x plus 2 times x plus 1. Now it's telling you're going to use the same rules. If C is positive, okay, and B is positive, everything is going to be positive, okay? So in this case is when A and C. Now we have A and C. We have an extra number. So the first thing I want you guys to do is, can we GCF an A? I'm going to expand right here. I cannot, there's no GCF. 4, 13, and 3. The greatest is 1, and that's already a prime number. So you're going to have A is your 4, B, and C is for 3. So the first thing I want you to do, I'm going to try to do this in a shortcut, and it's easier for you to understand. So you're going to multiply A times C, okay, A times C, which is 4 times 3, gives me 12. You're going to find factors of 12 that when multiplied together gives you 12, but when added gives you B. Okay, same rules as before. So what numbers do we have? 12 times 1, everything is positive. So 12 times 1, as you can see right here, when added together gives me 13, which is our B. There's no need for me to continue finding factors. We guessed it right on the first one, okay? So you're going to use the equation and rewrite it, okay? So you're going to have 4x squared plus 12x plus x. Remember that 1 is the same as x, okay? So we're just not going to write it. We should be used to now knowing that x basically means 1. plus 3. So in a way, you kind of broke this down. You notice 12x plus x gives me 13x. Now you're going to, in a way, kind of separate, okay, into binomials so that you could factors, okay, two binomials. So you can factor. We're going to separate 4x squared plus 12x and x plus 3. Leaving that middle sign in the middle, which in this case is a positive. Sometimes it could be negative. And now you're going to see, is there anything that I can factor out in this first binomial, which is 4x squared plus 12x? I can factor out 4, right? I can factor out 4x. And I'm left inside with x plus 3 plus x plus 3. Only because there's nothing I can factor out in the second one, correct? But if you notice, I'm just left with the x. So when you see this, that there's nothing that can be factored out, factor out a1. Okay, factor out a1. So x plus 3. Because if you recall, this little one over here is rewritten again. And we're going to have plus 1. Okay, so if you notice, both binomials inside the parentheses are equal the same, x plus 3 and x plus 3. So our final answer is going to be x plus 3. Then we have times 4x plus 1. This right here is our final answer. In B, there's no GCF, so you're going to go straight to multiplied A and C to figure out B. Okay, A times C gives me 3 times 2, which is 6. Positive 6. And I know this is negative. B is negative. So where we're going to have is going to be 2 negative. So negative 6 times negative 1 gives me negative 6. And I know that when these added together will give me negative 7. And that is what B is, correct? So let's rewrite everything again. My answer is now going to be 3x squared minus 6x plus, minus x, right? From over here, plus 2. I'm going to divide everything into 2. Separate, right? So what can I factor out here? I can factor out a 3x. Why do I keep grabbing this? 3x, and I'm left with x minus 2 minus, remember that 1, minus 1 because there's nothing I can factor inside. Right? And I'm going to have x minus 2. The reason it's minus 2 is because if I was to distribute negative 1 times x will give me negative x. And negative 1 times negative 2 gives me positive 2. So remember, all you're doing is factoring out. Now I see that both of the inside the parentheses are the same. So that's going to be x minus 2. And I have a 3x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. And that will be your final answer, factor out. Same rules. I see C is negative. So when it's negative, remember you're going to have a positive and a negative, different signs. I cannot factor 2, 5, and 7. So I'm going to multiply. Let me use another color beside yellow. Gonna multiply A times C. Remember this here, A, C, and B. A times C, which gives me 2 times negative 7 gives me negative 14. Factors of negative 14, when added, will give me negative 5. In this case, will be 7 and 2. But which one will be positive and which one will be negative? If I have negative 7 plus 2, I'm going to get negative 5. And that's exactly what B is. So rewrite my equation. I'm going to have 2x squared minus 7x plus 2x minus 7. We're going to divide now. Not divide, I guess separate your binomials. I'm going to have 2x squared minus x and 2x minus 7. What can I factor on the 7? I mean in the first binomial. Only in x, right? So what's left inside? X times 2x minus 7. Can I factor anything out? Nope. So I'm just going to use the 1 outside. Plus 1. What's left inside is 2x minus 7. Everything in the parentheses is the same. So its final answer is going to be 2x minus 7 times x plus 1. But now we have when A is negative. So we notice here A is negative. So the first thing we are going to do is, because A is negative, I want you to factor out a negative 1 from the trinomial. Okay. The best thing to do is you could use any type of reminder for yourself. I like to use a bracket. Okay. So if I use a bracket, I'm going to take out that negative sign. And inside I'm going to be left with 4x squared plus 8x minus 5. Why that means that I did here, okay, I took out the negative sign outside. So that means everything inside changes, because when I factor back in, if I was to distribute that negative, I'm going to have negative 4x, negative 8x, and then negative, negative, positive 5. So that's important. Now I'm going to see, can I have any GCF with 4 and 8 and 5? None. So I'm going to go straight to multiplying A times C, which is 4 times negative 5, which gives me negative 20. What factors of negative 20? C is negative. So you're going to have different signs. Will give me positive 8. Remember, this is already done, so you can scratch off the first equation. We're now working with the equation we rewrote when we factor out the negative 1. So I know that 10 and 2 will give me 8. But which one will be negative? The 2, correct? Because 10, we're going to have two different signs, remember, because C is negative, so two different signs. 2 is going to be negative. When added, this gives you positive 8, which is my B, correct? So let me rewrite everything. I'm going to use still my bracket. I'm left with 4x squared plus 10x minus 2x minus 5. And do the same steps. Separate them by binomials. So we're going to be left with negative. What can I distribute out of that first one? The GCF of 4 and 10 is going to be 2. And I could distribute an x. Factor an x, right? So I'm going to be left with 2x plus 5. I'm going to have a negative, and I cannot factor anything out on that second one. So I'm just going to put minus 1. And remember, because I'm having minus 1, everything inside changes. 2x plus 5. Remember, if I was to distribute, this becomes negative 2x, and this becomes negative 5. So I can see that inside my parentheses, they're the same, correct? So I'm going to rewrite my whole equation, which is going to be, remember now you bring down the negative sign. It's going to be negative times 2x plus 5 times 2x minus 1. That's your final answer. Just remember, you see a negative on A, the easiest method is put a bracket or anything that will remind you. You could do double parentheses, but sometimes with double parentheses, in a way, when you see a bunch of parentheses, you kind of forget which one is what. So brackets, kind of the grouping, it helps you realize that you have that negative sign outside. If you do not write that negative sign outside, your answer is going to be incorrect. Factor the polynomial. Remember, first thing I want to know is, do I have a GCF between 8, negative 56, and 48? Which, yes, we do. Which is the number 8, right? I'm going to have 8 on the outside, factor out. Left with 8x squared minus 7x plus 6. C is positive, B is negative, so everything P and Q are both going to be negative, correct? So 6, negative 6 and negative 1, when added together, gives me negative 7, and that's what's my B. So I'm going to have 8 times x minus 6 times x minus 1. And that's my answer. In number 2, I'm going to see, is there anything I can factor with 14, 31, and 15? So I can't. So I'm going to do A times C, which gives me 14 times 15 gives me 210. C is positive and B is positive. So I'm looking for P and Q both positive. 210. What factors, when added together, gives me 31? Here I know it's going to be 21 and 10, correct? So rewrite my equation. I'm left with 14x squared plus 21x plus 10x plus 15. Going to separate again, which is going to be 14x squared plus 21x, 10x plus 15. Mind you, even if I were to wrote down 10x first and then 21x, you're still going to be able to factor everything correctly. It just depends which way you write it. It's perfectly fine. You're going to factor out the same thing. And this first one, I could factor out 7x. Why do I keep doing this? 7x times 2x plus 3. Plus, I could factor out here a 2. No, I'm sorry, not a 2. A 5, which I'm left with 2x plus 3. I can see that both on the inside are the same. So my final answer is 2x plus 3 times 7x plus 5. In number 3, C is positive, B is negative. That means I'm going to have two different signs. And there's no factoring the 2 because 2 itself, it's already a prime, right? So straight to A times C, which gives me 2 times 5 gives me 10. Factor is 10. When multiply, remember when I said it's both of them have to be negative. Negative 5 times negative 2. I know that when added, it's going to give me negative 7. And when multiply, it's going to give me positive 10. Going to rewrite my equation as 2x squared minus 5x minus 2x plus 5. Separate again, 2x minus 5x and 2x plus 5. There's nothing I can factor here in this one, so it's going to be just an x factor. X times 2x minus 5 minus, I cannot factor everything out, so anything out, so I'm going to have a 1. I'm going to be left with 2x minus 5. Both of my parentheses inside my parentheses is the same, so my final answer is 2x minus 5 times x minus 1. So we continue factoring the polynomial. Is there a GCF here? 3, 14, and 8? No. So I know C is positive, B is negative. Both of my P and Q are going to be negative. Multiply A times C, which gives me 3 times 8, 24. So what two factors gives me 24? And both of them negative. I know it's negative 14, so now it could be negative 12 and negative 2. Because these added together gives me negative 14. Rewrite my equation. 3x squared minus 12x minus 2x plus 8. Break them in binomials. So what can I factor in this first one out? 3x, and I'm left with x minus 4 minus 2, and I'm left with x minus 4 inside. Both of the parentheses inside are the same, so my final answer is x minus 4 times 3x minus 2. Number 5, I have C is negative, so that means I'm going to have two opposite signs, right? A positive and a negative. There's no GCF here, so I'm going to multiply A times C, which gives me 4 times negative 5 gives me negative 20. Negative 20 factors to give me negative 19 will be negative 20 times positive 1. Because when these are added together, you get negative 19, which is your B. You write your equation, so I'm going to have 4x squared minus 20x plus x minus 5. Separate them. And I can factor out here 4x, and I'm left with x minus 5. And in here, I'm going to have plus 1. And inside, I'm going to be left with x minus 5. I know these are both the same. So my answer is going to be x minus 5 times 4x plus 1. In number 6, there's no GCF, and C is negative, so that means I'm going to have opposite signs. So the first thing I'm going to have is A times C, which gives me 6 times negative 12, gives me, let me rewrite that so we can show it doesn't look like it's 6x. 6 times negative 12 gives me negative 72. So factors of negative 72, I already know that C is negative, so I'm going to have a positive and a negative. I know that 8 and 9, when subtracted, will give me 1. But this is a positive 1, right? So my smaller one is my 8, which is a smaller number, is going to be negative. When I add these two together, I get positive 1. If I write my equation, I'm going to have 6x squared minus 8x plus 9x minus 12. I'm going to separate them with, when I factor out this first one, I can factor out with 2x, and I'm left with 3x minus 4, plus I could factor out here a 3 times 3x minus 4. I can see that the inside of the parentheses are the same. So my answers are going to be 3x minus 4 times 2x plus 3. That's my answer. Now, as you can see, these all the first thing, look, if you have a as negative, then you're going to separate it. Then you start looking if it's a GCF. It's just an extra step when a is negative. So I'm going to have negative, and the inside I'm going to be left with 2y squared plus 5y plus 3. Correct? Because when distribute that negative sign, it's going to make everything either negative or positive. In this case, everything was negative. I took it out. Everything became positive. There's no GCF between 2, 5, and 3. So I'm going to multiply a times c, which gives me 2 times 3 gives me 6. And I know that, remember, this is done. That first equation, we're looking at the second one. 3, which is c, is positive. So I'm going to have factor 2 times 3, which gives me 6. When added, that's going to give me 5. Some of these, you can start using mental math. Okay, so now we write the equation. I'm left with negative. And this is where I did not write a what? I did not do a bracket. So I already saw my mistake. And that's why I get confused myself, okay? Write a bracket because I'm going to start using parentheses. I'm left with a negative bracket. So I'm left with 2y squared plus 2y plus 3y plus 3. I'm going to now separate them into my parentheses, which I'm going to have what? To factor, I could factor 2y here. Inside I'm left with y plus 1 plus, could factor out with 3, correct? So inside I'm left with y plus 1. Remember why 1? Because when you distribute, that becomes 3. 2y times 1 gives you 2y. You just do not write 0 or leave it blank. You write 1 because that's how factoring works, okay? So I am left with my final answer, negative. Bring it down. Times, they're both inside. Both insides are the same, correct? So I'm left with y plus 1 times 2y plus 3. Here again, I have a as negative, so bracket, factor it out. I'm left with 5m squared minus, basically the opposite, okay? 6m plus 1. There is no GCF, so I'm going to multiply a times c. This is done. A times c, which equals 5 times 1, gives me 5, right? And I know that c is positive, but b is negative. So that means they both have to be negative. So what gives me positive 5? Negative 5 times negative 1 gives me positive. But when added together, I'm going to get negative 6, correct? So I'm going to rewrite my equation. I have negative bracket, which is going to be 5m squared minus 5m minus m plus 1. I'm going to separate them, which is right over here. I can use a smaller pencil if you guys want. It will be like this, correct? So let's see what we can factor out. Negative. Here I could factor out 5m times m minus 1 minus 1, because I can't factor anything inside, so I'm just going to put the 1, times m minus 1. The inside is the same, so my new answer is going to be, bring down that negative sign, negative times m minus 1 times 5m minus 1. Number 9, I have another negative. So brackets, I have 3x squared plus x, remember opposite, minus 2. Done with that equation. There is no GCF. It's already at its prime. Correct? So I have a times c, which it is 3 times negative 2 gives me negative 6. C is negative. Therefore, I'm going to have a positive and negative P and Q, right? So negative 6. But I'm going to have 3 and 2. Which one? If here is positive, okay? Remember, it's an imaginary one. If this is positive here, that means I'm going to make my 2 a negative, correct? That when I add them together, I'm going to get a positive 1. Going to rewrite my equation. I'm left with negative on the outside. 3x plus 3x minus 2x minus 2. I'm going to separate them. What can I factor out here? I can factor out a negative. Sign outside. So inside I could factor out with 3x. And I'm left with x plus 1. Here I'm going to factor out a 2. And I'm left with x plus 1. So everything inside is the same. So my answer is going to be negative. Remember, bring it down. X plus 1 times 3x minus 2 for your final answer. Zoom out.